Today we're going to talk about subtraction of real numbers. And so the true definition of subtracting numbers is to add the opposite. So in this example where you have 9 minus 6 equals to 3, most of us know this, but officially the mathematical rule is adding the opposite. So we're going to add the opposite of positive 6, which is negative 6. So on a number line, you always start with the first number, which is 9, and we would move to the left 6 places because you are adding negative 6. Now, you don't have to use the number line method in subtraction, but you do need to know that adding the opposite, that is the formal definition, and that is the way I will work every single one of these problems. Now, if you can do it without having to change it and not having to think through by adding the opposites, you go right ahead and you add or subtract numbers the way you already know how. But I'm going to show you how you're going to use this particular method. And I'm not telling you that you have to use this method. What works for you works for you. So please make sure that you understand that. So the rewriting the subtraction problem, that's what we're going to focus on because it will actually help you later on in some of our other topics that we discuss. So we keep the first number, which is 17, and I'm going to add the opposite of 4, which is negative 4. Then I'm going to use my rules for addition. I technically subtract because they have different signs. And I keep the positive because absolute value of 17 is larger than the absolute value of negative 4. In the second example, I'm going to keep the negative 9, but I'm going to add the opposite of 12, which is negative 12. Since both of these numbers are negative, I add them and keep the negative sign. In the last example, we are going to take negative 52. We keep this one, and we're going to change this. Well, the opposite of negative 52 is positive 2. And when I add those two numbers together, I end up with 0. And 0 is an acceptable answer. Now, in the next couple of examples, it does not ask us to do it that way, but that's how I'm going to set up these problems so that we can turn around and use the addition process for adding numbers. Most students can add a lot better than they subtract. Not saying that applies to all, but most of us can add better than we can subtract. So I'm going to rewrite number 4 as 25 plus negative 31. That means I subtract those values and I end up with negative 6 because the absolute value of negative 31 is bigger than the absolute value of 25. In number 5, I'm going to keep the negative 48, but I'm going to add the opposite, which is 48. So I end up with 0. Here, I'm going to have negative 28, and I'm going to add negative 28 because the opposite of 28 is negative 28. That gives me negative 56. Since both numbers are negative, I'm going to add them together and keep the negative sign. In number 14, I have 14 plus 19. The opposite of negative 19 is 19. So I add those two numbers together and I get 33. For number 8, I'm going to initially set it up as negative 7 over 10 plus negative 2/5. I do need a common denominator. So negative 7 over 10 plus negative 4 over 10. Since they are both negative, I add the numerators. Negative 7 plus negative 4 is negative 11, and I keep the denominator of 10. In number 8, I'm going to keep the 8.5, and I'm going to add the opposite of 12.03, which is negative 12.03. Technically, when you add numbers that have different signs, you really subtract. So I get negative 3.53. The absolute value of negative 12.03 is bigger than the absolute value of 8.5. So you keep the negative sign of the number, or you keep the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. Now this says to do this in your head. And if you can do these in your head and you can look at this and go straight to negative 20, that's perfect. If you need to think of it as negative 3 plus negative 17 to get to the negative 20, that's fine. Here, if you can go straight to 15, that is great. If you need to think of it as 12 plus the opposite of negative 3, which is 3, to get to the 15, do that. You do what works for you. Here, I have negative 8 plus 6. If you can go straight to the negative 2, that's fine. But if you have to rewrite it to get there, that is fine. Now, the translations, this is all about subtraction. So the difference of 73 and 39. That is positive 34, because you should be thinking 73 plus negative 39. Now, 14 is different because it says 24 is subtracted from 17. So the 17 will go first, and we will subtract the 24. Now, if you can go directly to negative 7, that's great. If you need to take the time to write it as an addition problem and add the opposite to get to the negative 7, that is perfectly fine. You do what works for you. 2/3 minus 4/5. So 2/3 minus 4/5. I need a common denominator. Common denominator would be 15. So the first fraction would change to 10 over 15 minus 12 over 15. Since it's a subtraction problem, I should be thinking 10 over 15 plus negative 12 over 15. And that gives me negative 2 over 15 as a final answer. Number 16, the wording is very, very important. So here, 5.6 is less than 2.8. So 2.8 minus 5.6. If you rewrite it, you should be thinking 2.8 plus negative 5.6, and that gives you negative 2.8 as a final answer. Now, application problems involving subtraction. I'll give you a moment to read the question. So we are finding the difference between the two elevations. So if Laura investigates at the bottom of the trench is 8 kilometers below sea level. So here's sea level. So she is below sea level. And then she investigates and she is 3 kilometers above sea level. Find the difference between the two. So 3 minus negative 8 is a distance of 11 kilometers. Nick earned $385 a week for tutoring. He paid $127 for bundled TV and internet, $179 for electricity, $81 on water and sewer service. He also received a $25 refund check from his cell phone company. How much money did he have left after all of this was done? Okay, well, he earned, so that's a plus. Then he had to take away for the TV and the internet, take away for the electricity, take away for the water and sewer, and then he received a check for $25. So we're going to add that back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these three numbers, I'm going to add them together. And then I'm going to take the two positive numbers and add those together. So 410, that's the positive, minus 387, that equals to $23. Poor little fella had $23 left. A lot of us can relate to that. You should be thinking 410 plus negative 387, which means you truly do subtract. All right. So this table shows the week's transaction of an art museum, Monday through Saturday. Notice that 2 of those are in the negative and 4 of them are in the positive. So what I would do is I would add these 2 together, which gives me negative 100 or 1,934. And then I would add all of these together, and that gives me 5,504. And so for the total transactions for the week, I should add those 2 values together, or you subtract them. So that's a grand total of $3,575 total transactions for the week for the museum. Now, order operations using positive and negative numbers. This does get a little bit tricky, and this is where some people start kind of messing up with their positive and negative signs. So if you notice in example 20, we're doing nothing but adding and subtracting. So I'm going to rewrite both of these parts as addition. So 12 plus negative 7 plus negative 10 plus negative 6. Okay, I'm going to add these 2 together. That gives me 5. I'm going to add these 2 together. That gives me negative 5. And then I'm going to add these 2 together for a grand total of negative 11. Notice how I took all the subtraction parts and I added the opposite. Do you have to do that? Absolutely not. Could you have gone straight across that problem? You absolutely could have. You could have said 12 minus 7, which is 5, 5 plus negative 10, which is negative 5, and then bring down the negative 6, and you get the negative 11. So either way, you would be okay. Here, since we're doing nothing but adding and subtracting, I'm just going to go straight across the problem. So negative 12 plus 3 is negative 9. Negative 9 plus negative 4 is negative 13. And negative 13 minus negative 8 is actually negative 13 plus 8. And grand total is negative 5. So be very, very careful. In number 22, I have a group. Within the group, I have another group. So I have to do what's inside the group first, the innermost group. So that would be 18 minus 2 times 3 plus 4 times negative 1. I took care of that part right there. 2 minus 3 is negative 1. Now, within the bracket, I have 3 plus a multiplication problem. So I have to do the multiplication. What I'm trying to do is get one number inside the bracket. So 3 plus negative 4, that gives me one number inside my bracket. Now, I multiply before I subtract, so I get negative 18 plus 2, and that gives me a grand total of 20. Here, I have subtraction, addition, and multiplication. The first thing I have to do is I have to multiply. You always multiply before you add. Notice I have no grouping symbols or anything like that. I just have straight across fractions. So when I multiply that together, I end up with 1/4 minus 4/5. 2 goes into 10 5 times. 3 goes into 9 3 times. And I end up with plus 3/5. Now I'm going to go straight across this problem and I'm going to subtract first. So 1/4 minus 4/5. I have to have common denominator, which would be 20. So that would be 5/20 minus 16/20. Which gives me negative 11/20. So So I have negative 11 over 20 plus 3/5. Now I need to find a common denominator, which is 20 again. So negative 11 over 20 plus 9 over 20. I'm sorry, that should be 12 over 20. Oops. Apologize, technical difficulties here. And that gives me a grand total of 1 over 20. Now, in 24, we're going to clear all the square roots out. So I need one number under each radical. So I have negative square root of 49 minus square root of 49. So that would be minus 7 or negative 7 minus 7. You can think of it as negative 7 plus negative 7, and you get negative 14 total. Number 25, I need one number in each absolute value before I take the absolute value. So I'm going to clean this one up. So that's absolute value of 39 minus the absolute value of negative 48. Now, the absolute value of 39 is 39, and I'm going to subtract the absolute value of 48, which is negative, or the absolute value of negative 48, which is 48. That subtraction sign was in the original problem. So I do my subtraction and I end up with negative 9. You should be thinking 39 plus negative 48, and that will give you negative 9. Now, the last couple of examples, or actually this is the last example for this particular lesson, is you're going to plug the numbers in and then you will apply the absolute value. So you're going to substitute and simplify. Anytime you see the word evaluate, remember, substitute the numbers and then simplify using the order of operations. So x is negative 2 plus 4 times negative 7 minus 2 times negative 12. So I'm going to take care of the two multiplication parts first. So that's negative 2 plus negative 28 when I multiply that together. And then here I get positive 24. So now I'm going to go across, add these two negative numbers together. I get negative 30, and negative 30 plus 24 does produce negative 6. If you need any assistance with subtraction, now remember, if you subtract differently than what I just showed you, that is fine. You keep doing your subtraction your way as long as you are coming up with the correct answers. You do not have to use these methods provided it's just examples. So if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know.